People who say, "Sorry, I've been busy."
There's a phrase people use that sounds reasonable, honest, and completely understandable. Sorry, I've been busy. It explains everything without really explaining anything at all. Everyone is busy, that's the assumption. So the phrase feels safe. It doesn't invite questions, it doesn't create conflict, it gently closes the conversation before it gets uncomfortable. And most of the time, no one challenges it. Because being busy sounds responsible. It sounds mature. It sounds like something we all relate to. But the phrase always leaves something behind. Because when someone says, "Sorry, I've been busy," you're never sure if they were busy or if you simply weren't a priority.
Usually, the phrase shows up after silence. A message goes unanswered, a reply takes longer than expected, and when it finally arrives, it comes wrapped in an apology. "Sorry, I've been busy." It feels polite, considerate, almost generous. There's no tension in the words, no defensiveness, no reason to push further. The explanation sounds complete, even though it's vague. And because it sounds reasonable, the conversation moves on. At least, that's what's supposed to happen. The problem is that "sorry, I've been busy" rarely happens just once. It shows up again, and then again. Messages are delayed, follow-ups disappear, plans stay unfinished, and every time the same explanation appears, not as a one-time excuse, but as a pattern. Over time, the phrase stops feeling situational and starts feeling habitual. Because being busy once is normal, being busy every time becomes a signal, and that signal slowly changes how the conversation feels. For the person waiting, the phrase creates mixed emotions. There's understanding, because being busy makes sense, but there's also hesitation. You don't know if it's worth following up. You don't know if waiting longer would change anything, because nothing was said directly. The phrase explains the delay, but it doesn't explain the silence, and that silence becomes heavy. It leaves you guessing, not about time, but about importance. Most people don't say, "Sorry, I've been busy," to be dismissive. They say it because it feels safe. It avoids confrontation. It avoids explaining priorities, and it avoids uncomfortable honesty. Being busy sounds neutral. It sounds justified. And in a culture where everyone is overwhelmed, it becomes an acceptable shield. The phrase allows people to move forward without reflecting on what was delayed, not out of malice, but out of convenience. At some point, you start recognizing the pattern immediately. You see the phrase and already know how the conversation will unfold. Sometimes you're the one hearing it. You accept it. You let it slide. Other times, you're the one saying it, meaning it, but also using it to avoid a longer explanation. And that's when it becomes uncomfortable. Because you realize the phrase isn't really about time. It's about attention, about priorities, about what quietly gets postponed. Once you notice that, it's hard not to notice it everywhere. "Sorry, I've been busy" isn't a bad phrase. It sounds honest, understandable, easy to accept. But it's another example of how modern communication avoids clarity. Words that explain the delay without addressing the pattern, and somehow, without discussion, this became completely normal. So maybe the real question isn't who is busy. Maybe the real question is, who approved this?